The clatter of office shoes echoed down the hallway like usual, fluorescent lights humming softly above. Phones rang, keyboards clacked, and polite chatter filled the air. Just another ordinary day in the building. But tucked away near the vending machines, something unusual broke through the background noise, a voice, then another, each one different. Not accents, languages, rapid-fire French, polished Mandarin, crisp Arabic, fluid Russian, perfect intonation, seamless transitions. It wasn't coming from a conference room. It wasn't from a high-level executive on a client call. It was from the far corner of the hall, where the maintenance cart sat parked neatly beside the supply closet. No one paid it much attention until Karoline Leavitt stopped mid-step, frozen by the sheer elegance of what she was hearing. Her ears didn't deceive her. This wasn't someone reading off a phrase book or practicing Duolingo. This was fluency, depth, nuance. She didn't say anything at first. She simply listened. Language is more than words. It's culture, cadence, context. And whoever was speaking had mastered all of it. These weren't sentences strung together out of textbook memory. They carried rhythm and soul. They carried identity. Karoline stood still, stunned not just by the skill, but by the setting. In a building obsessed with resumes and job titles, here was something raw and pure, hidden in plain sight. She was no stranger to ambition. Her career had been built on spotting potential before others did. But this was different. This wasn't potential waiting to bloom. This was potential already fully realized, completely invisible to everyone around it. She didn't need to know the backstory to understand what she was witnessing. Talent doesn't always wear a suit. It doesn't always sit behind a polished desk. Sometimes it moves quietly, without applause, completely underestimated because of how it's packaged. Sometimes it hums tunes in Italian while wiping fingerprints off a window. Sometimes it recites flawless Japanese as casually as others. Scroll through emails. The longer she stood there, the more she realized just how easy it is to overlook genius. The office, like most, was compartmentalized. Titles dictated worth. Credentials validated ability. People didn't look down hallways for brilliance. They looked at business cards. But here, right now, was a wake-up call. A reminder that intellect doesn't seek permission to exist. It just is, whether or not anyone notices. Karoline had always believed in merit, but this shook her. Because it wasn't just about recognizing skill, it was about realizing how many people probably walk by it every single day without a second thought. It was about how the world decides where brilliance is allowed to live, how easily it gets buried under assumptions, overlooked because of uniforms or accents or where someone happens to be standing in a building. She could hear Spanish now, not classroom Spanish. Street-level, native fluency. It was mesmerizing. But it wasn't a performance, it was just another day. That's what struck her most. The casualness of it, the comfort, the authenticity. No one trying to impress. Just someone living within their gifts, quietly. And suddenly, Karoline felt the weight of a question pressing in. How many other people have we ignored? How many times has society walked right past minds that could have changed the world because they didn't fit the mold? How many multilingual thinkers, mathematical, savants, creative prodigies have been handed a broom instead of a chance? She wasn't thinking about politics or policy. She wasn't thinking about diversity statements or corporate slogans. She was thinking about reality. And the reality was, someone in her building, someone everyone else had passed by, had more cognitive firepower than half the leadership team combined. It didn't feel like a coincidence. It felt like a flaw in the system. A flaw no one had the courage to fix because no one was willing to look close enough. Until now, there was no applause, no crowd gathering, just Karoline standing still, watching a moment unfold that most people would have walked right past. That's how real genius usually appears. Not in a viral video, not at a TED Talk, but in a quiet corner of a workplace, speaking language after language to no one in particular, just because they can. Karoline Leavitt didn't wait for permission. The moment she recognized what she was hearing, she shifted into action. Not with hesitation, not with polite curiosity, but with a certainty that came from instinct. There was no question about what needed to be done. She wasn't the kind of person to stand around marveling while talent went ignored. She was the kind to move, to act. And that's exactly what she did. She turned on her heel, walked past 2 departments without making eye contact, and made a straight line to the glass-walled office near the executive wing. It wasn't scheduled, it wasn't planned, and it certainly wasn't cleared with the usual bureaucracy. But that didn't matter. There are moments in leadership when you don't wait for protocol. You make decisions because they're right. This was one of those moments. Within minutes, doors were opening. HR was called in. Managers began to gather. Some of them looked confused, others skeptical. There was no memo, no pretext, just Karoline, sharp-eyed and unshaken, explaining that a conversation needed to happen now, not next week, not after committee review, now. Not because it was convenient, because it was necessary. She didn't give a flowery speech. She didn't recite a mission statement. She simply laid out the facts with the clarity of someone who sees straight through noise. She spoke about capability, precision, and the cost of missed opportunity. She pointed out the blind spot everyone had been living with, and she did it with such conviction that no one dared challenge her. It wasn't about charity. It wasn't about optics. It was about value. A kind of value that couldn't be bought with a degree or a certification. A kind of value that organizations spend millions trying to attract, but often fail to notice when it's already standing right in front of them. She knew the system. She'd played within it long enough to understand its weaknesses. And one of its biggest flaws? Talent too often goes unnoticed unless it's dressed up, pre-approved, or neatly categorized. But true talent doesn't always follow the script. It shows up in unconventional places, wrapped in stories that don't match corporate templates. That's why Karoline didn't waste time trying to convince people through the usual channels. She knew what delay would mean. Another missed chance. Another exceptional mind passed over because it wasn't framed correctly. That wasn't acceptable to her. Not on her watch. She made it clear that what she'd discovered wasn't anecdotal. It was transformational. This wasn't about being impressed. It was about recognizing a strategic asset. In her world, that kind of recognition had to be immediate. You don't shelf brilliance. You deploy it. Every minute wasted in committee was a minute that talent wasn't being used to its fullest. And Karoline wasn't about to let the machine of office culture grind that opportunity into the dust of indecision. That's why she moved fast. That's why she refused to let anyone dilute the urgency with bureaucracy. She didn't speak in hypotheticals. She gave examples, real ones. Situations where communication had stalled because of language barriers. Deals that had slipped through the cracks. Meetings where nuance had been lost in translation. And then she explained how all of that could change, overnight. Not by hiring a consultant, not by outsourcing, but by looking inside, by understanding that the future of the company could be sitting right down the hall. Some of the execs tried to nod thoughtfully, as if they were already ahead of the curve. But Karoline wasn't interested in appearances. She was interested in results. She wanted commitments, not promises, not "we'll circle back." She wanted decisions. And she got them because she didn't ask for a favor. She made a case, a bulletproof one. One based on performance, not pity. One rooted in the core values every organization claims to care about: excellence, innovation, resourcefulness. She reminded everyone in that room of something they'd forgotten: that real leadership doesn't wait to be told what to do. It doesn't wait for conditions to be ideal or for everyone to agree. It moves when it sees truth. It acts when it sees value. It makes bold calls when no one else is looking. And she had seen something that demanded that kind of call, so she made it, swiftly, decisively, without compromise. Karoline Leavitt believed in performance over pretense. To her, a title meant nothing if it wasn't backed by substance. That's why, when confronted with an extraordinary display of talent in the most unexpected of places, her immediate instinct wasn't shock, it was action. But not just any kind of action. She wasn't interested in token gestures or symbolic praise. She wanted to place capability where it could make the most impact. The moment she understood the depth of what she had witnessed, she didn't think about where someone came from or what their current position was. She thought about where they should be, not based on hierarchy, not based on formality, but based on merit. Pure, unfiltered, undeniable merit. It wasn't about breaking rules. It was about applying the very principles that so many companies only pretend to uphold. The glossy values etched into corporate brochures and mounted in office lobbies, words like excellence, integrity, innovation, those weren't just decorations to Karoline. They were mandates. And when she saw those values come alive in someone who'd been overlooked, she knew what had to happen. She advocated immediately for a promotion. Not out of sentiment, not because she wanted to make a point, but because it was the most logical and necessary step. In any system that claims to reward talent, extraordinary ability deserves elevation. That's not charity. That's efficiency. She made it clear in every conversation following that this wasn't about fairness, it was about accuracy. If someone possesses a level of skill that exceeds those around them, then it's not only fair to advance them, it's foolish not to. Every minute that person is stuck in the wrong position is a minute the company is underutilizing its greatest resource. And Karoline had no patience for inefficiency, especially when it masquerades as structure. The truth is, most organizations operate on invisible scripts. They promote those who fit the mold, who follow the predetermined ladder. But Karoline was never one to be guided by convention. She understood that sometimes the most valuable players are found far from the spotlight, in roles society has wrongly assigned lesser importance. She also understood how dangerous it is when potential is ignored simply because it isn't dressed in the usual packaging. Her decision wasn't about rewriting the rules. It was about applying the ones that already existed, but with integrity. If the policy said promotion was tied to skill, then the only question that mattered was, does this person demonstrate exceptional skill? The answer was obvious. So the promotion wasn't controversial, it was inevitable. Of course, not everyone in the room saw it that way. Some raised eyebrows, some whispered about protocol, others questioned how it would look. But Karoline had little interest in optics. She wasn't in the business of making people comfortable. She was in the business of results. And she had zero intention of allowing bureaucracy to dull the edge of talent. She framed it not as an exception, but as a correction, a realignment, a moment where the system was forced finally to live up to its own promises. This wasn't about special treatment, it was about rightful treatment. It was about reestablishing the idea that merit isn't a slogan, it's a standard. Karoline refused to sugarcoat the issue. She spoke with precision. She laid out what had been missed, what was at stake, and what the company stood to gain by finally recognizing the asset in its midst. She challenged others in leadership to look inward. How many others had they misjudged? How many other decisions had they made based on assumptions instead of evidence? She didn't entertain excuses. She didn't tolerate delay. She showed, through action, what it means to lead with clarity and conviction. By championing someone solely on the basis of ability, she reminded everyone what real leadership looks like: fearless, fair, and focused. Her decision didn't just change one trajectory, it exposed a flaw in the system and set a new precedent. One where skills take precedence over resumes. One where results matter more than reputation. One where people are seen for what they can do, not for what they've been assigned. It started with murmurs, confusion, a few glances exchanged over cubicle dividers. People paused mid-email, their attention pulled by something they couldn't quite place. Word traveled fast in an office, faster than memos or management directives ever could. But this wasn't gossip. It was disbelief wrapped in curiosity. Something had shifted and everyone felt it. Karoline Leavitt had made a decision. And when she made a decision, it didn't just ripple. It thundered. It wasn't just about a new title or a different desk arrangement. It was about what that decision represented. The shift was seismic, not because it was loud, but because it revealed just how much everyone else had missed. The office, like many, had fallen into a rhythm of assumptions. Departments were neatly siloed, roles rigidly defined, and people saw each other not for who they were, but for what was printed on their ID badges. They weren't malicious about it, just indifferent. Routine had made everyone blind. But when Karoline acted, she forced those blinders off. Suddenly, the person who had moved through the building in near invisibility was now being spoken of in meetings, referred to in emails, brought up in discussions about strategy, language access, international expansion. People who'd never said more than a passing hello were now scrambling to understand how they could have missed something so obvious. It wasn't just that a promotion had taken place, it was that their entire perception of what was possible had been challenged. Karoline didn't stage a grand reveal. There was no dramatic announcement, no orchestrated presentation. What she did was much more disruptive. She let competence speak for itself. And when that competence began showing up in real time, fielding client calls in multiple languages, resolving cross-cultural miscommunications in seconds, translating documents without relying on software, there was no denying the reality anymore. People were stunned because they were forced to confront their own passivity. The question wasn't just, how did we not know? It was, why didn't we care enough to find out? That's what made it uncomfortable. That's what made it powerful. It exposed a quiet, collective failure, but it also created a spark. Karoline's decision began to reshape how others looked at the workplace. Suddenly, conversations weren't just about quarterly goals or task lists. People began asking real questions. Who else are we overlooking? Where else might brilliance be hiding? What assumptions are holding us back? Teams started operating with more awareness. Managers walked the halls differently. Colleagues who'd previously floated through the day now paused to engage with people they'd never acknowledged before. It was as if someone had turned up the brightness on the entire environment. New opportunities were being considered, not because of new hires, but because of newly discovered assets already inside the building. This wasn't about creating a culture of sentimentality. It was about creating a culture of attentiveness. Karoline hadn't just promoted someone, she'd shifted the lens. She proved that sometimes the most valuable shifts in an organization come not from outside consultants or top-down overhauls, but from paying closer attention to the people already present. The result wasn't chaos, it was awakening. The hierarchy didn't crumble, but it was questioned. And in that questioning, a new layer of energy emerged. People began volunteering skills they had never mentioned before. A developer admitted he spoke fluent Korean. Marketing assistant revealed her background in international law. A receptionist quietly demonstrated her coding side project to a stunned IT lead. All of this had been there the entire time, hidden beneath job descriptions and daily routines. But it took one bold decision, one unapologetic move from Karoline, to shatter the illusion that ability always looks a certain way. What followed wasn't envy. It wasn't resentment. It was respect. Earned, not demanded. People watched real skill being used with precision, humility, and speed. The value was undeniable. And with each success, each problem solved in a new language, each moment of seamless communication across global barriers, the stunned silence in the office slowly transformed into admiration. Karoline had not just redefined one role, she'd redefined the lens through which everyone viewed potential. And nothing in that office would ever be quite the same again. What began as a quiet, almost incidental discovery became a catalyst for transformation, not just for one individual, but for an entire workplace culture. Karoline Leavitt's response wasn't about making a moment go viral or creating a feel-good story. It was about setting a precedent. When excellence appears, no matter where or how, you elevate it. Not later, not eventually, immediately. In doing so, she exposed a truth many prefer to ignore, that meritocracy often exists more in theory than in practice. Titles, resumes, and connections too often take precedence over raw capability. But Karoline shattered that norm. She chose substance over symbolism, and in doing so, forced everyone else to confront what they'd been missing. What made this moment so powerful wasn't just the action, it was the clarity behind it. Karoline didn't ask others to be inspired. She didn't wait for a groundswell of support or a sign-off from committee. She saw value, recognized its urgency, and acted. That kind of decisiveness is rare. It's uncomfortable, but it's necessary if real change is ever going to happen. And what followed was the ripple effect of leadership done right. People who had spent years feeling unseen began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, someone would finally notice them too. Colleagues started rethinking how they assess worth, not by role, not by resume, but by results. The idea that brilliance could come from anywhere became not just a statement, but a reality people could see and feel. This wasn't just a promotion, it was a reordering of assumptions, a bold reminder that the people we pass by every day might carry gifts we never bothered to uncover. It was a call to pay attention, to listen better, to look deeper, to stop letting appearance dictate opportunity. In the end, the most powerful thing Karoline Leavitt did wasn't that she gave someone a chance. It was that she refused to let the system ignore them any longer. She proved that leadership isn't about power, it's about perception. The ability to see what others miss, and the courage to act when others hesitate. The office would continue. Emails would resume, meetings would be held, deadlines would come and go. But something fundamental had shifted. There was now a sense that potential doesn't always knock. It sometimes sweeps floors, answers phones, or walks the halls unnoticed. And all it takes to change everything is someone with the eyes to see it, and the will to do something about it.